I think the conversation piece is easy. I think the piece when I go home and I said, "Oh, hi, what's up? How you doing? Fine. Anything going on? No. You want to talk about anything? Nope. Thank you." You know what I mean? Like, where do you,
Where do you
where do you
start?
start that? And then even if my child wasn't in the Facebook, he's the nerd because everybody else. Oh, he's the nerd because everybody is on Facebook. So he almost feels like he has to be on that or Twitter or something because nobody calls anybody anymore. Everybody texts.
That's true.
So it's just like even kids who may not be involved in it, I think they feel pressure to be in it so that they can be with other people who have it.
I can relate. My daughter is kind of that way. She's into cheerleading, very active, and so she's very focused when she gets home. And I almost have to like deprogram her and say, okay, let's spend a little time, although it'd be 5 minutes, but at least try to get into how was her day, what was going on with your class. I just try to get into a conversation where I ask open-ended questions where you're forcing them to, expand on, what's going on. And from that, I can glean any other information that allows me to have a conversation. So my suggestion would be just ask open-ended questions where it kind of forces folks to expand their conversation.
And I don't mean to interrupt as a young person. I have a friend who doesn't have texting, so I'm forced to call him if I want to talk to him. And, I have friends who aren't on Facebook, so I'm forced to call them if I want to talk to them. So that isn't unheard of. And I don't think that makes them any less of a social person or interacting with anyone. So that could be, it makes you the bad person, but for their social life, they say, my mom won't let me do it, or something like that.
You were saying, how much do you punish? And we've had that with our son, and Randall touched on that. We all see a psychiatrist, am I correct? Psychologist, excuse me. And she pointed out to us, do not make it, and I think Randall touched on it, do not make it 2 years. Make it a couple days, and then give it back, and go back and forth with that instead of punishing really hard on them. And also, we had a thing happen a few years ago that a good friend of my son's father called, and unfortunately my son answered, and the father started yelling at my son, and I really couldn't get on the phone. My son hung up to say that I guess my son forwarded something to his daughter that was not right. And the interesting part is he denied it totally, and he might have just forwarded it and not seen exactly what was on it. And the funny thing is we called Verizon to see if we could get it, and you have to get a court order to be able to see, even though you pay the bill, to see if it did happen. So I found that very interesting.
With Verizon, you can really go in and just deactivate your daughter or son's phone. They don't have to physically take it away. We went that route. I just call up and deactivate, no charge, and just deactivate it. And I go, what happened? Well, that was the deal. No, but they haven't been out and deactivated it, reactivated it. So a little quicker than trying to fight through it.
So for anyone who didn't hear that, and just to make sure it's on the recording, the comment was that you can call Verizon or maybe some of the other cell phone companies and actually deactivate the phone. You can go online yourself and you can deactivate the phone.
Are you on Verizon, sir?
Yes.
Because we called and they said there was a charge every month. No? Maybe they've changed that. Okay. Do it all the time.
Do it all the time.
Hi, my situation is this year my son's school provides laptops. He has MacBook, and I have no control over it, if you will. We had to get a DSL in our house before we had dial-up, so I had control because it was our computer in a public area. Now he has the laptop in his room, and we have the DSL, and I don't know how to put restraint on the DSL to restrict where he goes, and I can't, unless I confiscate the computer, which I can't legally do, because it's the schools, I kind of feel I'm stuck. So help.
I would talk with the school. And you may have already done that route, but I would talk with the school about putting the same restrictions they have on at school on the school laptop. And I would be shocked if you were the only parent who was concerned about that.
Carrie, I'm hearing a little bit of a mix of questions about monitoring use and then questions about discipline when it comes to taking away privileges. How long, how severe, and I think there's some different opinions out there, and I wonder if you could expand a little bit on sort of what sorts of things that the privilege would be taken away for, and for how long, and how severe, and that kind of thing.
Sure. Sure. And this varies, I think, by family and by child. And I would recommend sitting down and talking with your child about, here are the things that are our rules, and here are what the consequences are going to be for violations of these rules. So, for example, if the rule is that the phone is to be charged in the kitchen, not in the child's bedroom, and then you discover that the phone is in the bedroom at whatever time you go in to wake the child up in the morning, and that's a violation of the rules, then there should be a clear consequence that the child knows in advance is going to happen. It can often be our gut reaction to really want a consequence to be something huge when we discover something for the first time and haven't thought about how we want to handle that situation. So that's one of the reasons that I recommend talking this through and thinking this through with kids in advance. Of course, there are going to be unexpected things that happen. But things like removing a phone for a day as an initial kind of consequence to see how that goes would be really appropriate. For most kids and teenagers, a day without their phone it's a lifetime. Now, you might see that doesn't deter the behavior from happening again. So, maybe then, after a couple weeks of trying for a day, then you up it to a couple days. Things like violations of rules about engaging in things like cyberbullying online or sending inappropriate forwards, where now we're talking about something that's not just affecting your child and family, but affecting someone else, I would expect to have some steeper consequences, and those might be limitations on the computer for a week. Those might be, you don't get on Facebook again until you give me your password, and then I, as a parent, am going to check that every couple days to make sure you haven't changed it, maybe every day. Those would be some general thoughts on that.
I am a mother of very young children, and hearing everybody talk about the internet and their cell phones and their texting is very, very alarming. My oldest is 8 years old, and she's already asking, Mommy, when do I get a cell phone? Mm-hmm. And that's the question I have. What is the appropriate age to give your child a cell phone?
So, like many things in this digital age, there is no clear, good, research-supported answer to that. However, when I talk with families about that issue, I urge them to think about, what are your own family's needs? Is there a reason, for a safety reason, or for an after-school reason, or for a pick-up or drop-off reason, that the child needs a cell phone? And if there is, then that might be something to talk about getting, albeit probably a pretty basic cell phone that's not going to allow all sorts of other things. But a lot of parents of young kids say, no, there really isn't that need. We have a really good schedule of drop-off and pick-up. We don't really ever run into unexpected things that come up. And in those cases, I don't know that a cell phone's necessary. I think it becomes a matter of family necessity.
Yeah, I agree. I think my kids got a cell phone like around 10 or 11. I mean, granted, that was eons ago, but I think it depends on the situation. If they're out and about and they need a phone to communicate with folks, then it's actually a tool to engage both parties. In this case, the child and the parent, and acts as a safety net for them.
I was just going to comment on what you said earlier, how to get your son to talk to you, because I ran into the same thing. It just comes off, yes, hi. But somebody gave me advice, which I thought was very helpful. First is like I did ask open-ended questions like, who did you play with today, or who do you want to, what do you want to do this weekend? But also somebody said, usually at night, because when you tuck them into bed or whatever, and then they really don't want to go to bed anyway. I find I get a lot of information that way. So then I'll ask the same questions, and then her tell me everything. So just wanted to pass that on.
The one other thing related to that is sometimes, especially with boys driving in the car, it's a great time to talk to them. They don't have to make eye contact with you, and you're kind of stuck there together. So that's another kind of good time that can help.
Just one comment to add to that last conversation. You could always have like a trial run situation. We have one cell phone that my husband and I share, and a 13-year-old son, and we have found occasion where we'll give him the cell phone to use when he's out at the movies with his friends, and then when he comes back, he gives it back to us because that's where the need was, and it served its purpose, and then he's done with it. And he hasn't lost it yet, and he hasn't abused it, and we don't even have texting on the phone. So just kind of doling out, the responsibility and helping him learn how to be responsible with it in small doses is kind of the way we're going, and it's working out. But I do have a question now that he has a girlfriend about who seems to be much more experienced and advanced in the whole world of texting and social networking than he is. So he's coming up the learning curve a little bit more quickly than we prefer. I was hoping to really understand the definition of what sexting is, because I remember being a 13-year-old, hormonal girl, and not having the courage to have conversations as bold on the phone as I think what the kids seem to have the boldness to have when they're texting and you're not face to face. So what is on the other side of the line that makes a conversation that is, normal adolescent hormonal friskiness, so to speak? Where do you cross the line into sexting? Do there necessarily have to be pictures involved? I don't think so. But what kind of language and what kind of back and forth makes something then sexting that should put up the flags that where you realize you really need to intervene or address?
The first line of defense is, I think, it's the photos. That's the part that, that's the one that I think you can't let that genie out the bottle. As far as the actual texting is concerned, again, that can take a life of its own as well, because people can forward things. But for me personally, I always go back to that upfront conversation. It sounds like you've had that with them, with your son, and I think it acts as a gauge or a baseline for them to at least hopefully engage in future conversation as to what's appropriate and what's inappropriate. By just stating what you expect and what you are willing to inspect will determine whether or not they think that you're calling their bluff or anything of that matter. But that's the way I personally handle it. Because my kids, even though, like I said, my son's he's almost 20, I still hold him accountable to the same rules as if he was, 16. I don't waver not one iota, because I look at his brand. His reputation is at stake, and if he wants to get a job, all these little things that you might think is funny at that moment, as soon as you hit that enter button, it's gone, and now your reputation could be destroyed. So that's what I try to stress to them, their own personal brand. Are you willing to compromise it?
And I sometimes think about the say it out loud test. And particularly when talking with adolescents about things that they're posting online, would you say this out loud with your mom or dad standing there? With your grandma? That's a fantastic one. Would you say this out loud? And if you wouldn't, then you probably don't want to put it in writing somewhere on the internet. And if you're seeing things in writing that if you heard them out loud would strike you as too sexually suggestive for your child, then that personally for me would cross that line. But I think it's a pretty fuzzy line, and that's something I think we've seen in the media where there are, school districts go through things where they uncover rings of kids who are sexting, for example. But it's a pretty subjective line.
I heard you reference colleges looking at Facebook accounts. Do jobs look at that kind of thing? And is it like a permanent record if I have something on Facebook that's somewhat inappropriate and then the employer can look it up later, or what?
The answer is yes and yes. Yes, if you're your employer, because the electronic airwaves are basically the right of the company, they can inspect that information and use it however they see fit. There have been situations where people have gotten fired based on comments that they might have made that were inappropriate. And so as a potential employer, I've seen information where, from an application standpoint, you have to check off that you are willing to allow them to check your social media account just to get a profile of who you are, because that's what they want to try to look at to determine whether or not you're a good citizen for the company.
Okay, so thank you all so much for your time and your attention and your fantastic questions. Join me in giving another round of applause to our speakers. And also join me in a huge thanks to Nancy DiArgenio, who is the brains behind this operation, as well as all the other staff here tonight to make things run. So thank you, thank you, thank you.